The first lectures for this course will center on the chemistry of life. Now, many of you might be thinking, but I signed up for biology, not chemistry. Why do I need to study chemistry in a biology class? The answer to that is simple. All life is based on the many chemical reactions and molecular interactions that are occurring inside every cell of every living organism. It is these chemical reactions and interactions that allow life to occur. So biology, the study of living organisms, is intrinsically linked to the chemistry occurring inside those living organisms. In this unit, we will focus on the three main topics: the structure of an atom, the types and importance of chemical bonds, and the structure and function of key macromolecules. In this video, we will be discussing the structure of an atom. As we begin with our study of the chemistry of life, we will start with a few key terms. The term matter refers to anything that has mass and takes up space. In other words, it is all the stuff that the universe is made of, including everything you interact with, from the food you eat to the air you breathe or the water you drink. These are all examples of matter. Matter is made up of substances called elements, the next term on your list of words. Elements are the simplest form of substances. They have specific chemical and physical properties that are unique to one specific element and cannot be broken down to other substances by ordinary means. Two elements are pictured here. The first is sodium, a soft silvery metal. The second, pictured in the flask, is chlorine, a yellow-green gas. This chunk of sodium would be composed only of sodium atoms. An atom is the smallest unit of matter that still contains the properties of the element. We will talk about atoms in detail in a minute. It is important to study the details of atoms because it's the interaction of atoms with other atoms that allows for all chemistry of life to occur. When atoms interact with each other, they form molecules, the fourth term on your list. Sometimes molecules that are composed of different types of atoms, for example, the sodium chloride seen here, that is produced when you mix sodium atoms with chlorine atoms, are also called compounds. It is important to note that molecules and compounds take on properties that are different than the elements that compose them. Remember, sodium is a metal, and chlorine gas is actually highly poisonous. But when you mix them together, you generate a compound, table salt, that you consume all the time. This changing of properties is caused because of the chemical interactions of the atoms themselves. Atoms are made of three main components: protons, neutrons, and electrons, which determine their chemical properties. Atoms contain a dense nucleus. You can see in the figure that the nucleus is composed of blue and green balls. The blue represent the protons, notice the positive charge, while the green represent neutrons and are neutral. The third component of the atom are much smaller than protons or neutrons and form a cloud around the nucleus. These are the electrons and are associated with a negative charge. Certain properties of atoms can be determined by viewing the periodic table of elements. Each box gives details on the atoms that would make up a specific element. While there are many different elements, up to 118 represented on this table, from a biological perspective, there are four key elements: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, which combined make up over 96% of the human body. We will use carbon as an example on the following slides. Here we have zoomed in on the carbon box of the periodic table. On the top, we find the atomic number. This is the element's identifying characteristic stating how many protons are found in the atom's nucleus. It is the number of protons that defines an element. If that number changes, it is no longer the same element. So in this example, we see carbon has an atomic number of 6. Thus it has 6 protons. If it magically gained 2 protons to give it 8, it would no longer be carbon, but would now be an atom of oxygen. In a neutral atom, the atomic number is also equivalent to the number of electrons and the number of neutrons. The number on the bottom is the atomic mass. The mass of an atom is determined by the number of protons plus the number of neutrons in the nucleus. I just stated that often the atomic number is also equivalent to the number of neutrons. In that case, 6 protons plus 6 neutrons would give an atomic mass of 12. However, we see that the atomic mass stated is slightly larger. This is because in nature, not all carbon consists of neutral carbon atoms. In nature, there are multiple forms of carbon which are called isotopes. In these figures, the red balls represent protons and the blue are neutrons. You will notice that each has 6 red protons, because remember, it must have 6 or it is no longer carbon. The correct answer to the previous question was B. Isotopes have the same number of protons and electrons, but different numbers of neutrons. Since the atomic mass is determined by both protons and neutrons, the atomic mass for each isotope is slightly different. The atomic mass given on the periodic table represents an average of all the isotopes of that atom in nature and is considered a relative atomic mass. While isotopes of an element have different weights, they chemically function exactly the same. This is because the chemistry of an atom is based on the number of electrons, and all isotopes have the same number of those. Electrons are key players in the chemical reactions of atoms because of their structure around the nucleus. Electrons circle the nucleus in a cloud organized by electron shells and orbitals. Each orbital can hold 2 electrons, and electron shells can hold 1 or more orbitals. Electrons are often depicted using the Bohr model. We will draw the Bohr model for carbon as an example. In the center is the nucleus. You do not need to draw the individual's protons and neutrons, but we will write them here as a reminder. Moving out from the nucleus, you have the first electron shell. This shell has 1 orbital, and thus it can only hold 2 electrons. Remember, carbon has 6 protons and thus 6 electrons. We can draw 2 of those electrons in this first shell. The first shell is now full and cannot hold any more electrons, but carbon still has 4 more electrons in its structure. We will have to move to the second electron shell. The second shell contains 4 orbitals. Each orbital can hold 2 electrons, thus the second shell can hold a total of 8 electrons. A single electron is added to each orbital before any one orbital is filled with 2. The orbitals are represented by the different poles of the electron shell. Thus the remaining 4 electrons will be filled in like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, providing the structure with the 6 electrons that consist in carbon. Bohr diagrams are important because they help you determine how the atom will interact with other atoms. Every atom is most stable with a full outer shell of electrons. They will fill their shells by either losing, gaining, or sharing electrons with other atoms. In our carbon example, the outer shell can hold a total of 8 electrons. Thus, carbon needs 4 more electrons to fill its outer shell. It most often obtains these by sharing electrons with other atoms, providing the scaffold for making all our key macromolecules of life, such as DNA, proteins, and carbohydrates. In the next video, you will learn how losing, gaining, or sharing electrons allows atoms to form chemical bonds with one another.